The NHL offseason is less than 1 month away, so I wanted to make a video going over what I think is every NHL team's biggest need that they have to address this summer. As always, I want to know what you guys are thinking, so be sure to let me know down below in the comments, what do you think your favorite team's biggest need is for the 2025 offseason? So with that all being said, let's go ahead and start off with the Anaheim Ducks. If you were to ask me this a few months ago, I would have said their biggest need is moving on from Greg Cronin and getting a new head coach. But they've already done that, so I'm going to say their biggest need is acquiring a top-of-the-lineup forward. This past season, the Ducks ranked 30th in the NHL in goals for per game, and they had the worst power play percentage in the league, despite the fact that all of their young core forwards did pretty well. Terry McTavish, Carlson, Gauthier all scored 20-plus goals, but outside of those guys and Frank Vatrano, offense was kind of hard to come by for this team. Now, hopefully moving on from Greg Cronin by itself unlocks a bit more offense within the group that they already have, but still, I definitely think this team could use a veteran top-of-the-lineup forward to come in and help take some of the pressure off of the young guys. And the Ducks have nearly $40 million in projected cap space, so I'm expecting them to be very aggressive in free agency and trying to bring in a player like that. Moving on now to the Boston Bruins, and I'm going to say their biggest need they have to address this offseason is bringing in some depth scoring. This past season, David Pastrnak gave the Boston Bruins his usual production, 40-plus goals, 100-plus points, and Morgan Geekie also had a breakthrough season, finishing with 30-plus goals. But outside of those two guys, they really didn't get a whole lot of offensive production from the rest of the forward group. If the Bruins want to get anywhere close to getting back into the playoffs again next season, they're really going to have to bolster that middle six, and similar to what I said about the Anaheim Ducks, I am expecting Boston to be very aggressive this offseason because they have over $25 million in projected cap space, as well as some additional first-round picks that they got thanks to the moves they made at the deadline. Moving on now to the Buffalo Sabres, and I'm going to say their biggest need is a right-shot defenseman. Right now, the only right-shot defenseman they have signed through next season is Connor Clifton. However, Jacob Bernard-Docker is an RFA, and I'm expecting them to bring him back. But even after they get Jacob Bernard-Docker signed, there's definitely still a need for a right-shot defenseman. I don't think it's going to work out having Dahlin, Power, and Byram all on the same team. Ideally, long-term, you want those guys playing on their strong side. And given the fact that Bowen Byram is a restricted free agent this offseason, and he's a name that was brought up quite a bit leading up to the trade deadline, I think it's very likely he gets moved at some point this summer. And if that is what ends up happening, maybe the return for Byram ends up being the right-shot defenseman that they've been looking for, who they can staple next to Rasmus Dahlin. Next up, we have the Calgary Flames. It sounds like GM Craig Conroy plans to be very aggressive this offseason in trying to bolster the roster and build off of the season that they just had, where they narrowly missed out on making the playoffs, despite the fact that they ranked just 29th in the NHL in goals per game. When I look at their roster, I honestly think their biggest need is a legit number one center, and of course addressing that is obviously a lot easier said than done, especially considering the fact that they don't really have anyone in the prospect pool who's expected to come in and be that guy. Now, Nazem Kadri did have a strong season for the Flames, but if you were to rank every NHL team's first line center, Nazem Kadri would probably be in the bottom half of that list. If they can find a way to bring in a high-end centerman, which then would knock down Nazem Kadri to the second-line center spot, all of a sudden they look a lot stronger and a lot deeper down the middle, because Nazem Kadri would go from being, a mediocre first-line center to a very good second-line center. Next up, we have the Carolina Hurricanes, and I'm going to say their biggest need is definitely an elite forward, someone who can come in and help take some of the pressure off guys like Svechnikov, Aho, and Jarvis come playoff time. And we've seen Carolina try and address this need in each of the last two seasons. In 2024, they acquired Jake Gensel, and it looked like Gensel was a really good fit. However, he ended up leaving in free agency. And then this season, they acquired Mikko Rantanen. We all know what happened there. So not only is their biggest need an elite forward, but it's an elite forward who's going to be there long term. Moving on now to the Blackhawks, and I'm going to say their biggest need is a winger to play with Connor Bedard long term. He's had so many different line mates throughout his first two seasons in the NHL. The two guys he played the most with this past season are Ryan Donato and Ilya Mikheyev. Ryan Donato was a good fit, but Donato is a UFA, and Ilya Mikheyev is ideally somebody you want playing in your bottom six as a defensive specialist, not somebody you want playing with your franchise star in Connor Bedard. The Blackhawks have a ton of cap space. I think it's time for them to take a swing, whether that's on somebody like Besser, Ehlers, or even Marner. I think the front office has to signal to Connor Bedard that they are trying to turn this thing around as soon as possible, because I think it's pretty clear that this past season the losing really started to get to Bedard. Next up, we have the Avalanche, and I'm going to say their biggest need is a number 2 center. Really, ever since Nazem Kadri left, they've been looking for somebody to fill that void. They brought in Casey Middlestat. He didn't end up being that guy, and this past season at the trade deadline, they were able to acquire Brock Nelson, who I think did solid as the number 2 center, but he's a pending UFA, and it's likely that that was just a rental. So I definitely think solidifying that number 2 center position, not just by bringing in somebody to be a placeholder, but bringing in somebody who can be a long-term option for them there, should be a big priority for the Avalanche this offseason. Next up, we have the Blue Jackets, and if they want to build off of the season that they just had and continue to be a team that's in contention for a playoff spot, I think they need to address the goaltending situation. Elvis Merzlikins has now had 3 consecutive seasons, finishing with a sub-900 save percentage. The Blue Jackets were one of the more dynamic offensive teams in the entire league this past season. If they could have even just gotten a little bit above league average goaltending, I think there's a good chance that they would have been a playoff team. And Merzlikins is a guy who has publicly requested a trade out of Columbus in the past. I really think it's finally time to move on, whether that's by finding a team to take him off their hands via a trade or just by buying him out. If the Blue Jackets want to have a legit chance at making the playoffs next season, I don't think you can go into the season with Elvis Merzlikins as your starting goaltender again. Moving on now to the Dallas Stars, obviously a very strong team top to bottom, but when I look at this roster, I think there is one glaring need, and that is to reshape the right side of their blue line. The 2 right shot defensemen they signed in free agency last offseason in Matt Dumba and Lyubushkin really haven't worked out. Dumba has been a healthy scratch all playoffs, and recently Lyubushkin has been as well. So I think it would go a long way in really rounding out this team if they can find a way to move on from one or both of those guys this offseason and bring in a legit top 4 right shot defenseman. Next up, we have the Red Wings. I mean, take your pick. There's a lot of things they need to address. The penalty kill, they could use a top 4 defenseman or 2, but I'm going to say their biggest need is 5-on-5 offense. The Red Wings had a very good power play this past season. I believe the only team that scored more power play goals than them during the regular season was the Winnipeg Jets, and yet the Red Wings still finished 22nd in the entire league in goals per game. Pretty much all season long, this team struggled mightily to generate any kind of offense at even strength. They have a very top-heavy lineup, and if they want to finally get back into the playoffs next season, that's going to have to change. Next up, we have the Edmonton Oilers, and I'm going to keep this one simple. Extend Connor McDavid. He's heading into the final year of his contract next season. If you're the Edmonton Oilers, the last thing you want to do is start next season without a McDavid extension in place, because I can only imagine the kind of distraction that would be. Moving on now to the Florida Panthers, it's hard to pick out a specific need for this team because they are just so good top to bottom, but I'm going to say their biggest need this offseason is retaining and bringing back at least one of Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, or Aaron Ekblad. It's looking like the Florida Panthers are going to make the Stanley Cup Finals for the 3rd consecutive year. If they end up winning the Cup and going back-to-back, I mean, they're on the verge of a modern-day dynasty. This current version of the Panthers looks virtually unbeatable in a 7-game series, so this offseason I definitely think it should be a priority for the Panthers front office to try and keep the band together the best they possibly can. Moving on now to the LA Kings, I'm going to say their biggest need is a top-line winger. Andrei Kuzmenko actually ended up being a pretty good fit for the Kings. They brought him in around the trade deadline, but he's a free agent this summer. I really think the Kings are a team that needs to be big game hunting in free agency and targeting one of the top names available. They need to do something to try and get over the hump. If not, they might as well just put in a formal request to the NHL to move the Edmonton Oilers out of the Pacific Division. Next up, we have the Minnesota Wild, and I'm definitely going to go with depth scoring as their biggest need. In my opinion, that middle six really lacks offensive punch, and I think that became very clear when Kirill Kaprizov went down with injury. They struggled to score throughout the second half of the season. Moving on now to the Montreal Canadiens, I definitely think their biggest need is a number 2 center. It's not looking like Kirby Dach is going to end up being that guy for them, which I think is what they were hoping for when they traded for him. I think somebody like Sam Bennett would be an unbelievable fit on this young Montreal Canadiens team, but looking at their cap situation, I think that's an unrealistic target for them unless they're able to move off a contract like Josh Anderson before free agency comes around. Moving on now to the Nashville Predators, and this one's kind of a tough one for me. Like, they're in a difficult spot right now. They were bad this season, and they're an older team with a lot of money tied up in big long-term contracts. I think their biggest need really all depends on what their direction is. If the goal is to get back to being a competitive team and fight for a playoff spot next season, then the blue line needs a lot of work because outside of Roman Josi, the blue line is rough. But if the goal is to rebuild, then I think it should be a priority to try and move on from a couple of these aging veterans on big money deals and get younger. Next up, we have the New Jersey Devils. This is an easy one for me. They need to bring in a top 6 winger. Andre Palat absolutely cannot be stapled next to Jack Hughes when Hughes returns to the lineup next season. You have such a dynamic duo in Jack Hughes and Jesper Bratt, and the player that they played the most with this season at 5-on-5 was Andre Palat, who at this point in his career is an absolute black hole offensively. Moving on now to the Islanders, and I'm going to say their biggest need is to make a decision when it comes to Noah Dobson, because I think whatever they end up doing with him is definitely going to impact who they end up taking first overall. Noah Dobson is a restricted free agent. He's likely going to be looking for a big money long-term deal. It feels like his name has consistently been thrown around in trade rumors for a while now. If the Islanders view him as their legit number 1 defenseman moving forward, then lock him up long-term and draft one of Hagens or Misa. If not, then I think it's probably in their best interest to move on from Dobson, trade him for Hall, and then select Matthew Schaefer. Moving on now to the New York Rangers, I'm going to say a top 4 defenseman is their biggest need. For the majority of this past season, the Rangers had one very good defenseman in Adam Fox, and then the rest was just meh. Keandre Miller really hasn't been able to take the next step that I think a lot of Rangers fans and the Rangers were hoping he would. So if the Rangers are going to get back to the playoffs next season, I definitely think they need to get Adam Fox some help on the blue line. Somebody like Gavrikov I think would be a really good fit. Next up, we have the Senators, a team that I don't really think is in need of any major changes heading into next season. I feel like they're in a good spot. Their top 4 defensemen are all signed through next season. Maybe they could use an upgrade on the bottom pair. And it goes without saying, but if Claude Giroux doesn't end up coming back, they could definitely use another top 6 winger. Moving on now to the Philadelphia Flyers, I definitely think their biggest need is a dynamic top 6 center to play with Matvei Michkov. Don't get me wrong, Sean Couturier is still a very solid two-way centerman, but at this point in his career, I think he would be better off centering a shutdown line, and I think Michkov would definitely benefit a lot more from having more of an offensive-minded center. Moving on out to the Pittsburgh Penguins, I'm going to say their biggest need is young NHL-ready players who can come in and help right away, but also be long-term options for the Penguins too. I just can't see Pittsburgh going into a full-on rebuild as long as Malkin, Crosby, Letang are still playing at a high level. I think they're going to want to give those guys a chance to compete for a playoff spot, and I think the best way of doing that while still prioritizing the future is by acquiring young NHL-ready players. Some names off the top of my head that I think could be trade targets for the Penguins: Marco Rossi, Bowen Byram. Last season, we saw the Penguins take advantage of the situation between the Jets and Rucker McGroarty and trade for McGroarty. Maybe they could do something similar to that again this offseason and trade for Isaac Howard. Next up, we have the San Jose Sharks, and I'm going to say their biggest need is a top 4 defenseman, or even 2. It's looking like next season Yaroslav Askarov is going to be a full-time NHLer for the first time in his career, whether that ends up being in a platoon role with a different goaltender they bring in, or he ends up being the full-on starter and starts upwards of 50 games. I don't think it would be ideal for his development to have a complete train wreck of a blue line in front of him, and right now on paper, San Jose's blue line heading into next season looks garbage. Next up, we have Seattle, and I honestly think their main priority this offseason should be to continue to sell. They already have 2 first-round draft picks in both the 2026 and 2027 drafts, thanks to the Yanni Gordon-Bjorkstrand trade they made with Tampa at the deadline. I'm not saying Seattle needs to completely rebuild, but I honestly think it would be in the organization's best interest to maybe strip it down for a season and go for the first overall draft pick in a year where somebody like Gavin McKenna is going to be available. Because when you look at their roster right now, I just don't think they're all that close to being a playoff team next season. You have pending UFAs like Jaden Schwartz and Jordan Eberle, who would likely fetch nice returns in a trade, and the wild card is Jared McCann, who has 2 more years left at a very team-friendly cap of $5 million. If they look to move him, they could be looking at a massive return. Again, I'm not saying this has to be some long, grueling rebuild, but I really think it would benefit Seattle in the long term to tear it down for a year, maybe land a first overall draft pick and draft a Gavin McKenna, and then have a ton of cap space available for the summer of 2026, where the free agency class looks absolutely loaded. Moving on now to the St. Louis Blues, I really think they could use another young defenseman. Even with Philip Broberg, the blue line is still pretty old. Torrey Krug isn't expected to ever play again. Ryan Suter's likely going to retire. And I definitely think they should look for a team to take on the final year of Nick Leddy's contract, because Cam Fowler turned out to be a huge upgrade over Leddy. Next up, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning. They're a team that doesn't really have too many holes on paper. Their decor, with the exception of Perbix, are all still signed through next season. Their top 6 in terms of their forwards are pretty much solidified with Kucherov, Point, Gensel, Hagel, Sorelli, and Bjorkstrand. So I would say their biggest need is probably just a couple of depth forwards. Bringing back Yanni Gourde, I think, would be huge for them. Moving on now to the Maple Leafs, I feel like there is 2 very obvious ones here. If Mitch Marner ends up leaving in free agency, they are definitely going to need a top 6 winger. And no matter what ends up happening with Marner, they need a puck-moving defenseman, somebody who can quarterback the power play, because for whatever reason, the Maple Leafs just didn't look great with the 5-forward power play unit like some other teams did. As far as who that puck-moving defenseman could be, it's hard to say. Nobody in the free agent class really jumps out at me. I mean, Tony DeAngelo is a name that could make sense. Or maybe the Leafs go big game hunting and try and trade for a name like Noah Dobson or Brant Clark. Moving on now to Utah, I definitely think they need another top-of-the-lineup forward. Clayton Keller had a fantastic season, finishing with 90 points, but then there was a pretty big drop-off, and second on the team in scoring was Logan Cooley with 65. They still have a lot of draft picks. They have a ton of cap space. I really think Utah is going to be very aggressive this offseason and looking to add a big-name forward. I feel like this ownership group wants to get this team to the playoffs as soon as possible. Next up, we have the Vancouver Canucks, and they could definitely use some help up front, especially if Brock Besser leaves. They're going to need a top 6 forward, or maybe even 2, and they still have a pretty big decision to make in regards to Elias Pettersson. His future with the team feels like a bit of a question mark right now. Are they going to keep him? Are they going to look to trade him still, even after already moving on from JT Miller? Moving on now to the Golden Knights, kind of similar to Tampa Bay in the sense that I don't really think they have any big holes in the roster. They're a pretty strong team top to bottom. All of their defense are still signed through next season with the exception of Nick Hague, who is an RFA. Their top 6 up front is pretty solidified with Stone, Eichel, Hurdle, Carlson, Barbashev, and Dorofeev. They're all still signed through next season. There is some talk about them potentially being interested in Mitch Marner. I'm not buying it though. I mean, they would have to do some absolute cap gymnastics and either move on from somebody like Mark Stone or Alex Pietrangelo, which I don't really see happening. So for their biggest need, I'm just going to say maybe some depth forwards. Guys like Riley Smith, Brandon Saad, Tanner Pearson, and Victor Olofsson are all UFAs, so they're going to have some spots to fill in the bottom 6 for sure. Moving on now to the Washington Capitals, a team that I don't expect to have a very busy offseason. They filled a lot of their big holes last offseason when they brought in guys like Dubois, Matt Roy, and Jacob Chikrin. Their goaltenders are locked up. Their defense are pretty much all signed through next season. Maybe they could look to add a top 6 winger, as Beauvillier found himself on a line with Strome and Ovechkin during the playoffs, and no offense to Beauvillier, but I don't really think he is a first-line winger on a Stanley Cup contending team. But for the most part, I'm expecting the Washington Capitals to look relatively the same next season and really just count on the internal growth of their young guys, like Ryan Leonard especially. And now finally, finishing up the video with the Winnipeg Jets, I definitely think their biggest need is a second-line center, which is the same thing we said last offseason, the same thing we said at the trade deadline. Vladislav Nemesnikov is very solid. Adam Lowry did okay when he had to play in that second-line center role, but I don't think either of those guys are a second-line center on a cup contender. If the Jets can add a legit 2C and then all of a sudden you have Scheifele, whoever they bring in, and then Lowry and Nemesnikov as your 4th-line center, you look insanely deep down the middle. As far as who that could be that they bring in to be that 2 center, I think there's some solid names in free agency that make sense. Matt Duchene, Brock Nelson, Mikael Granlund. So that is going to wrap up today's video, going over every NHL team's biggest need this offseason. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I always want to know your guys' thoughts, so be sure to let me know down below in the comments, what do you think your favorite team's biggest need is that they need to address this summer? And if you made it all this way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself, please remember to leave a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does help out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.